Good evening. Welcome to Mesa Life Church. So it's great to see you all here tonight. We started a series last week about relationships, and we're titling this series of 3 C's of relationships. And last week, what we talked about communication, and how communication is important in a relationship. And oftentimes what you can do is, if there's a breakdown in the relationship, a lot of times you can track it back to just poor communication. And so communication is really important. And we learned that it's important to be transparent in our communication. And so we were talking about, you need to be open to say it, but you also need to be open to take it. And so we need to make sure we're giving words of encouragement, and we're not using our language and what we're saying to tear people down, especially in our relationships, and especially those relationships close to us. And on the other side, we need to be responsible that when we're told something, that we just don't easily get offended, that we just don't fly off the handle with it, that we're open to take it, and that we're open to say it. And so this week we're going to continue on with our series of relationships. And this part 2, oftentimes, happens in every relationship. We're going to talk about conflict tonight. Conflict is inevitable. We're going to have conflict all throughout our life. If we are going to be people that have relationships, like if we're going to be friends with somebody, if we're going to have any kind of relationship, if we decide to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or get married, or be engaged, we're going to run into conflict. It's inevitable. It's just part of life. And oftentimes, conflict is what people fear the most. People fear conflict probably more than anything in a relationship is conflict. When I was in school, especially in junior high and in middle school, I was not what you would term a fighter. I wouldn't even have called myself a lover. I was just, I was just me. And so, even in middle school, we had lots of conflict. There was this time when I felt somebody else was being wronged. And he was a friend of mine. He was a lot smaller than me, and this other kid was kind of picking on him and pushing him around. And so I thought I would stand up for him, and I would, assert my authority, because when I was in school, and maybe it's the same way now. It's been a few years since I've been in middle school, but you kind of had this popularity scale, and maybe you can remember this back when you were in school. You had some people that were really popular, other folks that weren't so popular. It didn't seem like they had a lot of friends, but the perception that came along with that popularity scale was the toughness scale also. And so if you were a popular kid in school, you were also a tough kid in school. And so I was kind of sizing up this guy, and I figured I was a little bit more popular than he was. And so I was kind of gauging myself on the toughness scale and thought, since I'm a little bit more popular in my eyes, I gotta be tougher than this kid. And so I stood up for him, and this littler guy that was being picked on, I was like, and addressed him and said, hey, this is not cool. You can't mess with him. You can't pick on him. And so he didn't like that so much, and so he challenged me to a fight, right? And so he kind of got a little forceful. We were in the boys' locker room at the time, and he's like, let's meet after school. And I was like, all right, I'll be there. And so of course, the buzz kind of went around, and so we were going to have our fight after school. And I'm still thinking, this guy's going to bow out, because I'm a little higher on the popularity scale than what he is. And so he's got to view me as tougher. And so if I just kind of, walk tall and puff out my chest, he's going to back down. He's going to back down. And so we get to the location where we're going to have our fight. And, we do kind of what most middle schoolers do when they're about to engage in a fight. There's just a lot of pushing, and there's, some screaming, some name calling, Very rarely do any punches get thrown. At least in my experience, I imagine there's, some of you have much different experience in regards to fight. But I was from a small town, and so I didn't have a lot of the big city or the inner city difficulties in school. So most of our fights were just a bunch of shoving around until everybody got tired of it and everyone decided to leave. And so that's kind of what happened. I'm still thinking, this guy's going to back down because I'm more popular than this guy. And but what ended up happening was he threw a punch, caught me in the side of the head, and that was it. The fight was over. And of course the police showed up because someone was concerned about a fight happening at the baseball field. And so then I got to explain to the officer what happened, and he could see the big old shiner on the side of my head. And so I had to walk around with that, and I didn't like fighting. I didn't like conflict, and maybe you feel this way. Every time it seems like we get into some kind of fight or some kind of conflict, your hands start to sweat, you start to get nervous, you get shaky, you get really short of breath, and you just can't think clearly. You're just a mess. You're just a mess. It doesn't matter if it's somebody just addressing something that you've done, or if it's actual physical altercation. I do not like conflict. I don't like conflict. This has been something that I've had to wrestle with and deal with my entire life. I'm not somebody that's confrontational. But we're going to face conflict. We're going to face conflict. So even for myself, I need to learn how to deal with conflict. It's important for me to learn how to deal with conflict because it's inevitable. And the reason why it's inevitable is because everybody is different. Maybe that's a revelation to you, but everybody is different. And so what that means is everybody has different ideas, everybody has different opinions, everybody has a different thought process on how to do something. And so because everybody's different, and we all have different ideas, different thoughts, and different opinions, there's going to be a time or two when those opinions, those ideas, and those thoughts, they're going to grind a little bit. And that creates conflict. And so for us to be able to have healthy, good relationships, we need to know how to deal with conflict. Now, conflict, you have healthy conflict and you have unhealthy conflict. All right, tonight we're going to talk about healthy conflict, but I do want to identify what unhealthy conflict is also. Because I think the majority of people operate in unhealthy conflict. And so I've kind of boiled it down to two different types of personalities, in unhealthy conflict. This is kind of a generalization, but you have people that they say they're not afraid of conflict. Okay, they kind of run into it head on, and their whole perception is when they get into conflict is that I am right and you are wrong. I am right and you are wrong. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. It doesn't matter what we're going through. I am right and you're wrong. That's just how it is. That's how it works. That's how it goes. Those folks, they just run and they don't listen to. It seems like they just don't listen to anything you would have to say, and it's based upon this idea where they have to be right. They've got to be right. There's no way in their head they can comprehend or process the idea that they could be wrong. Now there's another side. There's another side of the coin. It's the exact opposite. Those of us that like to run from conflict. Those of us who just can't stand, just are afraid. Like what I explained earlier, hands get all sweaty, you get nervous inside, you get short of breath, and literally feel like you're going to pass out, depending on the type of conflict and who it is that you're engaging with. But that is just as harmful as the folks who are always saying, I'm right and you're always wrong. I'm right and you're always wrong. People that run from conflict, what's devastating about that is that we never deal with any kind of hurts or any kind of issues with other people. And so what ends up happening is we end up stuffing it. We end up stuffing all of our hurts and all of our pains. And what we do is we then develop resentment against that other person. And so then now, we don't like this person that has wronged us or offended us, but we're not someone who likes conflict. And so we run from it. We kind of keep it to ourselves. And so now we've got this resentment. Now we don't like this person. Ooh, I don't like that person because they did this and this and this and this to me. And you tell somebody and they go, well, did you talk to them about it? No, I'm not going to talk to them about it. I don't like conflict. It's useless talking to them about it. They're just going to make me feel bad for having those feelings. And so we run. And we run from it. But because we develop that resentment, now that person can feel that. They can sense that there's something between us and them. They have no idea what's going on. And so what we've done, we've put a hook in them. Because we've held a defense against them that we're not willing to bring to light, that we're not willing to talk to them about it because we are afraid of conflict. Maybe you're thinking, man, I'm somebody that runs from conflict. I've been a runner from conflicts just about my entire life. And maybe you know people that you feel are the ones that just go headstrong into conflict with the attitude that I am right and you're always wrong. Man, maybe you're just having a real moment for yourself and you're thinking, man, that kind of sounds like me. I'm somebody that always thinks that I have to be right. Well, tonight what we're going to do is we're going to talk about healthy conflict. We're going to talk about how we can have healthy conflict with people that we have a relationship in to where it is good. Because conflict should benefit the relationship. Conflict should benefit the relationship. If the conflict is not beneficial to the relationship, then we put it in the unhealthy category. We stick it in that bucket. And so we either have a problem with somebody's refusing to be wrong, or somebody's refusing to engage in the conflict. And so if we're going to practice healthy conflict, we're going to have to give up a couple of things. We're going to have to take a couple of chances. We're going to have to be willing to let our hands get a little sweaty. Right now, my wife and I, we're kind of approaching the way that we're parenting our kids a little differently. We found out that, just telling your kids what to do all the time doesn't necessarily work. And we've also discovered this misconception as well that they have this label of the terrible twos. Well, that terrible twos a lot of times stretches into the threes, and then it goes into the fours, and then it lingers a little bit into the fives and the sixes, the sevens and the eights. And I imagine if you ask any parent that has had any kids, from 8 to adults, or even 30s, 40s, and 50s, I would imagine that those terrible twos kind of linger a little bit throughout all of that. And so they have this idea that they'll grow out of the terrible twos, which I'm here to tell you, that is a lie. The kids never grow out of the terrible twos. It just kind of morphs, and it kind of adjusts a little bit with each age group that they get into. But especially with our two youngest. Our two youngest are 2 and 4. One's just about to be 3. And, I'm the guy, and so I'm the authoritarian in the household. And they're boys, so I should know how to relate to them. I mean, come on, we're boys. We kind of butt heads together every once in a while. And, yeah, by golly, it's going to be my way. My way or the highway is how it's going to be because I'm the dad, and I know what's best. Well, pretty soon we started getting a lot of resistance from our 2 boys. And boy, we got fits and we got temper tantrums and we didn't know what to do. We were just kind of at our wits' end. And so we kind of read about this idea of validating their opinions. And I'm thinking, what? They're 2 and 4. Why would we validate their opinions? Why would we aren't we supposed to be shaping and molding them? Getting out the paddle and the spoon to make sure that they're living, good lives and that they can be good adults when they grow up. But Carolyn wanted to try this validating parenting, and I wasn't opposed to it by any means. The suggestions that she has in parenting and in our relationship, and I love it because she's extremely smart, and I love her input that she has into our family. And so I'm like, all right, so let's start validating their opinions. Not sure how we're going to do this, but let's give it a shot. And so I'm going to give you an example because I was approaching their conflict as I'm right and you're always wrong. I'm right, you're always wrong. And so I would tell them, okay, boys, it's time to get dressed or time to get your jammies on. And of course, what kid really enjoys getting their jammies on? Because they know what's coming right after that. It's bedtime. And so, of course, they're throwing fits. They're going crazy. But we started changing it, and we started asking them, hey, would you like help getting your jammies on? Would you like help getting your pants on? Would you like help going into the bathroom? Can I help you do this? Even though I'm still giving them direction, I started validating their opinions. And would you know it, I would not believe it if I did not see it with my own eyes. Their attitudes started turning around. Just like that, they just started turning around. They said, sure, you can help me. And we go in the bedroom and get dressed. And Carol and I would be standing there looking at each other like, wow, this is really working. This is really working. And even the best part about it, too, is that there was a time when Zachary was playing with a little plug in the wall, and at that moment, I had to give a direct order and direction and get his attention. And sure enough, instead of fighting me, he said, okay, Dad, dropped it, and walked away. Completely blew me away. All because I was willing to abandon the whole I'm right and you're wrong scenario. All because I was willing to validate and consider their opinions. Now, there is a line. We don't let them run rampant wherever they want to go, but it's working. We are having good conflict resolution with our kids. And sometimes that is the most difficult conflict you can face is with your child, because they know exactly how to push your buttons and exactly when to push your buttons. Now we're going to take a look at a letter, at a scripture here in the Bible from a letter that Paul wrote to the early church also that is going to tell us a little bit about conflict. But if you've ever read any of the epistles, now the epistles, what those are most all the books in the New Testament. They're all the letters that the apostles wrote to the church. People will call it the first century church or the early church because it was right when it was getting started. And if you read through these letters, you'll notice that the early church, although it was being effective and the gospel was spreading and churches were growing, the early church had a lot of problems. A lot of problems. You could just find that out by reading those epistles. I mean, you read them, what does it talk about? Hey, don't hate somebody. You gotta love them. Oh, come on, don't sue your brother. Okay, let's just work it out. You guys can work it out. I mean, some of these passages, I can just imagine Paul sitting there, just scratching his head, going, oh, okay, come on, guys. Don't sleep with your stepmother. That is not okay. Even the people that don't go to church think that is not okay. And so they had some real issues. They had some real problems in the early church that the apostles were addressing. And that was the reason they were writing letters. They were writing these letters back into the churches to kind of give them direction and to kind of do some course correcting on there. So there was a lot of conflict in the New Testament church. And so we're going to take a look at a letter Paul wrote to the Philippians. And the Philippians they were in a town called Philippi, and he was writing to the Philippian church, and he really liked the Philippian church. He enjoyed all the churches that he had planted, and so here we're going to look in Philippians 2, and we're going to be in verse 3 through 4. It says this. It says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain content. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own intentions, but each of you to the interests of others." So Paul was writing back to the Philippian church and saying, don't be selfish, think of others. To summarize these two verses, he's saying, don't be selfish, think of others. Well, how might that pertain to conflict? Well, if we enter conflict thinking that we need to be right, and even those of us that run from conflict, we run from conflict out of a fear of being wrong. Out of a fear that our feelings, our hurts, won't be validated. That we'll be told that we're overreacting, that, it's ridiculous. Why do you feel this way? You have no business bringing this up. Those are the fears that runners have. They don't address conflict because they are afraid of being wrong. So in both cases, those folks that just run headstrong to prove every single time that they're right, they don't care what they say, they don't care who they hurt, and the people that run from conflict, it's all premised around us, ourselves, selfishness, because we want to be right. We want to be right in our conflict. Man, I'm tired of being bashed. I'm tired. I'm right. I know I'm right. I'm right. But that's not what Paul is saying in this verse. Paul is saying, don't do things out of selfish ambition. Look to others. Don't do things because you're being selfish. Look to the needs of others. So if we take that principle and we apply that to conflict, what we're doing then is we are putting the relationship first. We are putting the relationship first because that becomes more important than ourselves. And as soon as we put the relationship in front of ourselves, you will start seeing a change in your conflict. You will start seeing a change in that relationship, and that conflict will actually build the relationship rather than be something that will tear it down. Be it words said in the conflict or the fact that you avoid it at every single chance you get. If we put the relationship first, it will improve our conflict resolution. And so what we need to do is we don't need to be right. We need to make it right. So don't be right. Make it right. Put the relationship first. Put yourself second. And what could that look like? How might that change the way that you approach conflict? How might that change the way that you come to a resolution in your conflict? Maybe we would stop letting it fester. You know what I mean? You think about the conflict that you're going to have. And you're kind of rehearsing it in your head. And you're thinking of all the lines, all the things that you can say that would come back and that would kind of put the other person in their place because you already know what they're going to say. You already know how they're going to come after you, so you're thinking, all right, well, I'm going to put them in their place by saying this. I'm going to cite this wrong about them. I'm going to cite that wrong about them. And since, okay, got to gear myself up. Okay, maybe the next time I see them, or maybe not the next time I see them because I'm going to see them at church, and church isn't a good place to have conflict. So maybe I can call them after the weekend because I don't want to call them over the weekend because they're with their family. But maybe if I don't call them, I don't want to call them during work. So maybe afterwards. So then we kind of tend to put off. We let that fester. But if we just work to make it right instead of being right, how could that change that whole scenario? Maybe you would stop gearing yourself up for the conflict. Maybe you stop thinking, 3 hours after you had a conversation with somebody, this is something that I would do. I would 3 hours after I have a conversation with somebody, then I would think of, I should have said that. Oh man, if I'd have said that at that moment, I'd have been right. Or maybe you think 3 days afterwards, you still are thinking about that conversation, thinking about the things that you should have said that would have made you more right. And maybe it would have put that person in their place. But instead of being right, we should work to make it right. So what would that look like? What would that look like? How does it look to actually make it right? How does it look to put the relationship before ourselves anytime and every time we approach conflict? Well, the first thing that we got to do, if we want to have healthy conflict, is we need to calm down. We need to calm down. That could mean reducing stress in your life. That could mean just taking a deep breath and letting it out. Because here's what happens. When we approach conflict with a lot of stress or with a lot of anxiety, we're pumping up our emotions. We're pumping up our emotions. And when we pump up our emotions, our thought process doesn't get very clear. Pretty soon our thought process goes from thinking logically to thinking emotionally. And if we are in a situation to where we're hurt or when we feel like somebody's wronged us, then those emotions that we're feeling are not very good emotions. They're emotions of hurt, of embarrassment, and so we don't think clearly. And so what happens is stress feeds the emotion, and that emotion will actually feed a fight. And so instead of having a conflict where you're coming to a resolution, you find yourself in a fight. All because we didn't calm down. Because we didn't calm down. We allowed our emotions to get the best of us. And it came back to centering on ourselves. I'm right because I feel this way. It is still okay to talk about your emotions, to talk about the way you feel. In fact, you should do that. But do it when you're calmed down. If that means taking a break, then take a break. But don't get back into the old routine of thinking in your head, all right, I'm gonna have this to say about it, I'm gonna have this to say about it, because I'm gonna be right because they hurt me and they wronged me, I don't like their opinion and that offended me, and so I'm gonna say this, this, and this. You can't go back to that old thinking. You just gotta calm down. Take a breather. Relax. Eat some chocolate. Have a bowl of ice cream. Something that will get you calmed down. The second thing that we want to do is we don't want to lose our healthy communication. We don't want to start being closed off, and we don't want to take offense then to what is being said. So, what did we learn last week? We still need to be open to say it and open to take it. Even in the middle of our conflict, we need to be open to say it, but more importantly, we need to be open to take it. Because that is what our responsibility is in the conflict, in the conversation, is what we say and how we take what other people say to us. So we could either choose to be hurt or not hurt. We could choose to be offended or not offended. It doesn't mean what the other person says won't be hurtful. You can just address the fact that it was hurtful. You don't have to let that emotion take over the conversation. So we got to make sure we're practicing that healthy communication, being open to say it and being open to take it. Another thing, if we want to have good conflict resolution, is we need to make sure to get off the seesaw. Now, what I mean about that is, some of you made this analogy, but have you ever been in a conversation where it just is not going anywhere? You're either talking, two different sets of opinions, you're in some kind of debate or what have you, but it just seems like the conversation just won't end. And that both sides are just, butt heads and just headstrong in this. I'm sure you could probably think of maybe an organization or two where you have two different sides that have very, very strong opinions and very, very strong ideas about how to do things, and they just don't get anything done. It doesn't matter how much they talk or who they talk to, and all they're trying to do is convince everybody else that what they think and what they're doing is right, and they come to absolutely no resolution. I don't know, maybe I could think of an organization or two in our country that happens to operate like that, but it doesn't get anywhere. It doesn't work. If we're not willing to get off the seesaw, we will never come to a resolution. We will never get there. So we need to recognize when we are on that seesaw and take a break. It is okay to take a break and come back to it later. If it is going nowhere, it is okay to take a break and then address it at a different time. Because the only thing that's going to happen if you keep going up and down on that seesaw, pretty soon, here come back our emotions. Because they're not listening, they're not seeing our point of view, and then it turns right back around to us, and now we're not thinking about the other person, we're not thinking about the relationship, and we're driving our conversation based off of our emotions. So we got to be willing to recognize and get off the seesaw if we're going to have healthy conflict resolution. I have a buddy of mine that plays a game with our kids. And it's this yaha, nah game. And so he'll say something, and especially with my daughter, and she'll go, nah, and he'll go, yaha, and she'll go, nah, he'll go, yaha, nah, yaha, nah, yaha. I don't know about any of you guys, but it kind of gets annoying very quickly. And so then we do the, okay, that's enough. And so that's that seesaw effect. There is absolutely no movement on either side. No movement whatsoever. And it's just back and forth. Yaha, nah, yaha, nah, yaha, nah. And so recognizing the seesaw and being willing to get off of that is another piece in being able to have good conflict resolution. Now the third part, or the last part, I'm sorry, that's not 3, this is actually the 4th one. So if you're taking notes, you didn't add an extra one. This is number 4. You work out a resolution. Now what that means is sometimes it's going to be a win-win, where you come to an agreement where everybody wins. That is the best kind of resolution. That is what we should always strive for. But there's going to be a time or two when the other person's going to win, you're going to lose. Like for instance, if my kids want to have ice cream for breakfast, they're going to lose and I'm going to win because they're not going to have ice cream for breakfast. It doesn't matter how much they practice this conflict resolution, I'm going to win and they're going to lose because I'm not going to feed them ice cream for breakfast. And so there are going to be times where you're going to have to suck it up and you're going to have to lose. But there are also going to be times where you're going to win and the other person's going to lose. But the idea is coming to a resolution. Is coming to that's win-win. If you can't get the win-win, then be willing to lose every once in a while. And be willing to win every once in a while. You ever play a game or a sport like basketball or a football or soccer with somebody and they always have to win? I mean, isn't that just annoying? You're sitting here playing cards and they start making up rules in the middle of the card game so they would win. There was a movie, it's one of my favorite movies, where this 5-year-old kid is playing cards with several different adults, and they have no idea what game they're playing, and he's just passing out cards. But the game is called I Win, and so it doesn't matter what cards all the other adults have. The kid always wins. And so one adult makes a comment like, "What kind of game are we playing?" The kid throws his cards down. I win. He's like, "How do you win?" He goes, "I win. Doesn't matter. My rule's my game. I win." And I'm sure several of you that are already picturing somebody like, "Oh yeah, I remember that kid in school. Always had to win when we played one-on-one. He would call the foul and, I got all the ball and if he started losing, he would pretend like he was hurt. Oh, I'm hurt. I gotta stop playing now." And every excuse always to win. Sometimes we gotta suck it up and we gotta be willing to lose. So I worked at a finance company a couple of years ago, and believe it or not, I had to address conflict just about every single day working at that job. Now, it did not make me any better at liking conflicts, and same thing, my hands would get clammy, because I had to call on collection accounts. And I also had to call on severely past due accounts. And so these are folks that, are 3, 4, 5 months past due, and they're just really far behind. And there were a lot of times where I would call them, and it's not they don't like being called anyway. And so already, emotions are running pretty high. And this is typically how one of those conversations would go. They would have usually 2 results. They would just get extremely upset and just yell at me, and so we both decided to hang up. That was how a lot of them ended. There were others, though, where we would start off just going at it, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter because, the reason why I was calling them was because they owed us money. And I would tell them, well, you owe money, in this attempt that, I'm right. I am right in the fact that you owe money. But the more I would tell them about the fact that they owed us money, the more hostile they would get, the more names they would throw at me. And the louder they would get on the other end of the phone, they would just start yelling and screaming. And so what I found out is if I stopped telling people the fact that they owed the money, kind of making them feel stupid, like they didn't know they owed me the money, and I started talking with them on, okay, well, how can we get this thing worked out? How can this become a win-win situation for the both of us? You owe me money. Obviously, you don't have the money to pay. But, again, you owe me the money. So we got to work together to try to get this resolved. I tell you, every time I approach people in that way, I was more often than not able to get them out from being behind on their accounts and back on track. I mean, so much so that I would invite people to come down to my office, and I would invite them to say, okay, let's take a look at where every single dollar is going, and let's see if we can come up with a resolution to get this fixed, to get you guys back on track, because this is hurting you. And the truth of the matter is, I've got a boss that loves me. And if I don't call you every day, he calls me. And I would much rather have an uncomfortable conversation with you than an uncomfortable conversation with him. So, your choice. I can call you every day, or you can come down and we can try to work this out. The ones that were willing to do that, we got them out. They didn't have to sell their car, they didn't have to sell their house, they didn't have to sell their belongings. We got them out. We were able to work together to come to a resolution. Now, a resolution requires a contribution on your part. Okay, you can't come to a resolution without giving something up. And that contribution is called compromise. And compromise is what we're going to talk about next week. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you that you made us relational people, that you gave us other folks around us that we could be friends with, that we could be close friends with, that we have a family that we can have a relationship with, and that you modeled our relationships after the relationship that you desire to have with us. But Lord, I know the relationships down here are tough, and that we have to face conflict. It doesn't matter who we have a relationship with, we're going to experience conflict. So Lord, I pray that this next week, now when we face conflict, when we face a situation that is uncomfortable, we have to approach somebody, we have to address somebody, that we would remember not to be right, but to make it right. And that we would consider the relationship before we would consider ourselves. And that the resolution we would get to would be for the benefit of the relationship and not to make ourselves look good and to make us right. I pray, Lord, that you would be with everybody this week. Keep us all safe. In Jesus' name.